Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions about media and production 24/7. If you're watching on YouTube, you can enter questions by using this QR code that should appear here. Yes, it did. And simply going to askofficehours.global. If you want to get more involved, remember that you can use our Mukana interface for your Q&A voting system. That means you'll be able to help us prioritize the discussion here because the questions with the most votes come up faster, and we discuss those topics in more length. Today in our second hour, we're going to be talking to Andrew M. Edwards, a composer who works in film, TV, podcasts, and other media, so it should be a fascinating discussion. That's our second hour, but right now it's time for your questions. So let's dive in. Courtney, what do we got on tap for today?
Well, let's see. First up, we have a question from Guy Cochran in Seattle. And he says, NDI-6 has been released. What's new?
Jeffrey Powers is going to help us start off. Jeffrey?
Oh, a whole ton of stuff has been released with NDI-6. It's really exciting, actually, and didn't get a chance to really download it till this morning because NDI 5.6 was on the website for a long time. But the big thing is they're giving native HDR support. They're also improving their WAN connectivity for the hardware. So now you can do different types. There's two types of HDR. It's PQ HDR and HLG formats. You got minimal color banding, better contrast options, and then native 10 plus bit color depth, which means that there can be an alpha channel set up over NDI. That's a real game changer right there. They also offer encryption, and with their WAN solutions now, you can set up a bridge from pretty much around the world and have the cameras. Well, of course, there's always going to be latency, but the latency is going to be very, very low. So you can start doing productions halfway across the globe, and hook up everything and be connected and see things in real time back and forth. So I'm finding that this is going to be very exciting, not only for cameras but for desktops. You can actually do you could basically do a KVM solution through a desktop that's a halfway across the world to open up any type of switching panel if you want to keep all the switching protocol back at the location of the cameras, and do a lot more. So I can't wait to really test out NDI-6 here. But also keep in mind really quick, if you have like a vMix or a Wirecast, you cannot bring in you can bring in NDI-6 if you sideload it, but vMix will still be on 5.6 until they do their update.
Yeah, I went to do a little research on it this morning, and something popped up, and then it went away. So I think this is maybe one of their releases they're really looking forward to chatting about at NAB. So if you're interested in that, we may be able to track down one of the booths, vMix or somebody else, who's heavily into NDI, and give you more information on it there. So keep tuned to our NAB coverage as we move forward. I think that takes care of the first question. We're moving on to the next one.
Oh, that's me, I guess. Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas says Ubiquiti just rolled out the UXG Max, a compact multi-wide area network independent gateway with full 2.5 gigabit Ethernet support and up to 15 times IDS-IPS routing performance improvement compared with USG. How will this improve your network workflow?
And Mickey's going to help us out here. Mickey?
So yeah, this is a new gateway from Ubiquiti. It comes with it does not have a built-in controller in it, so I think it's designed more for like branches of small businesses, like say a fast food chain, a restaurant chain, maybe a chain of stores, wherein you have a controller, because it does not have a controller built in. You have a controller that is hosted in the cloud centrally. So you have multiple branches being hosted, or multiple stores with their controllers being hosted remotely. I think this is the sort of the target market for that, because it's a relatively small gateway. They did release a what Ubiquiti calls a cloud gateway, which does include a controller built in. It supports a smaller number of of clients on the network. But it looks to be exactly the same size body, or maybe perhaps just a little bit larger than the new Gateway Max.
Yeah, it looks like one of those little Mac minis. So an interesting form factor. We're seeing a lot of those little small squares with rounded edges. Courtney, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, it wouldn't work for me because, I don't have a Mac Mini because it's designed to sit right on top of your Mac Mini and look and fit right into your decor.
There you go. So let's move to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, how would the panel recommend cleaning fingerprints from touchscreens without damaging them?
Ooh, Jeff Francis is going to start us off here. Jeff?
I use the little cloth that comes with your eyeglasses to clean fingerprints off there, and Apple recommends that you can make that slightly damp, the cloth, not the touchscreen. So you want to, and they also do recommend you turn devices off, but when I'm dealing with touchscreens like on an audio console or something like that, now I do that live because they annoy me right when I'm in the middle of production. So no time to shut the console down.
And definitely don't touch screens after lunch if you eat fast food. Mickey McAchore.
Yeah, I do the same. So I take a microfiber cloth, damp it down with a little spray bottle, wipe the screen, and then I take another separate microfiber cloth that is dry and wipe it down. I'm a big fan of the microfiber cloths from 3M. You can get them in like a 5-pack or a 10-pack.
Nice. Courtney?
Well, sometimes if they're really dirty, and the problem is fingerprints are oil containing, and a lot of times water will not it'll just push the oil around. It won't take it off. I do use Sprayway glass cleaner, which you can find it just about anywhere. It looks like this. It has a non-ammonia. There's no ammonia in it, and that's the dangerous thing. And it has a very mild detergent in it for cleaning fingerprints off. So I wouldn't go crazy with it. Don't spray it directly on the surface. Spray it on the cloth a little bit. It foams up, and then lightly wipe it off, and it dries very quickly because it has a little bit of alcohol and detergent in it, and it evaporates quickly. And I don't think it will change the capacitance of that screen because we use it all the time to clean prompter glass, which is first surface electroplated.
Jeffrey Powers.
And always, if you spray it directly on the glass, make sure that whatever device you're spraying on is turned off, because the last thing you want is that device get immersed in some backwash spray that could harm the monitor. And then, of course, keep your coffee cups close or far away from that as well, because then that little mist also can get into the coffee cups. And because I've sprayed directly on monitors before, and people standing next to us say, spraying the cloth, because I don't want that mist. So spraying in the cloth's always the best solution.
Yeah, this gets more complicated after so many video lenses and camera lenses of mine have had those incredibly thin and important coatings on them for non-reflection and glare cutting and the rest of that. The one thing you do not want to do is never be cavalier about cleaning monitors or lenses. If you use the wrong products, it'll damage those coatings they so carefully put in there. So just be judicious about what you use. Robert, what have we got next?
Next up, we have Craig Cadoti from Toronto, Canada. Will the proposed right to disconnect bill in California have any real impact on the live entertainment industry there or in any other state?
Nigel, help us out here. What have you seen?
So the right to connect laws really started in France, and where they were trying to enforce a shorter week. I think working from home really then drove those to the next level. And now we're at the point where people are starting to put these laws in. I will tell you that these laws, as one of my Chinese friends used to say, some laws are for the passing and some laws are for the following. This looks like one of the laws for the passing to make them feel good. If you look at the California law, there is an exception for emergencies. So I guess we're going to have to find out what an emergency is. But theoretically, it stops your boss from calling you out of work hours, giving you work or giving you directions. But as long as they can claim it's an emergency, then you're probably all right. And I guess at some point that will have to go to court to be defined what an emergency is. I would tell everybody that If you abide by this law in the same way that if you abide by only working the hours that you are paid to work, then you will damage your career. They may not be able to take retribution against you, but it doesn't mean you're getting the promotions.
I was a little bit surprised at the number of countries when I did a little research on this that have something. The right to disconnect is basically disallowing an employer to have you kind of on call 24/7 for things. But it's interesting the number of countries around the world that have something like this in place, I guess because they faced rampant abuses with employers requiring people to be on instant contact literally 24/7. So we'll see how it shakes out, as goes California sometimes, as goes everyone else, and sometimes not at all. Let's go on to the next question.
From Sam Rhimes in Maidenville, the UK, when researching new pieces of production tech, what are people's go-to reliable sources?
Courtney, start us off here.
Well, I'm a subscriber to American Cinematographer, and it does nice stuff about cameras and sound stuff. Also, get this from my union, Production Sound and Video magazine, which has a lot of articles on new stuff, and there's ads from manufacturers on new stuff and reviews in there. So those are pretty accurate. Those are my go-tos.
Mickey, what do you think?
Yeah, I go to colleagues in the industry, other sound mixers that have the said product and get their opinions on it. And I also reach out to the manufacturer or the reseller, the distributor, and see if I can get a demo unit then for testing, so I can evaluate for myself.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, I agree on that. It really depends on what the pieces of production are going to be. If you're talking on video side, you definitely want to go with other people that are video. And then, of course, you do have some generalists like myself that do pretty much all of them. But it really depends on what I would want to do. Like, for instance, if I wanted to research NDI6, which is what we were talking about earlier, I wouldn't go to somebody that is big on SDI connections because, I don't know how much they work with NDI, and they don't know what the nuances could be for that new product.
Jeff Francis.
And I can't believe no one gave the obvious answer, which is you come to office hours and you ask our panel and you ask our producers and you ask our Discord, because the depths of knowledge in this group, someone in here has probably put their hands on that piece of equipment, maybe at a trade show or something like that, or has had a demo like Mickey's gotten. And that's a great place to get the real dirt on new production tech. What are the pitfalls that I need to watch out for, and to ask the real questions. And then those people can ask questions of me that I haven't even thought of yet about incorporating this new tech into my production.
Come on. I get all my information off the internet, and I believe every single thing I read there. So if you see it on the internet, you could 100% rely on it. Let's go to the next question.
From James Callahan, Las Vegas, Nevada. Good morning, panel. Has anyone seen or used this M2 NVE enclosure for 2230 SSD drive that looks great for the iPhone 15, shooting ProRes with an external drive? Thoughts?
And Jeffrey Powers has some. Jeffrey.
Well, Sarge, I looked up the company. Sarge is actually used to be called Sarge Geek, and now they're called Sarge. They deal with small power conditioners. They deal with storage, and this was an Indiegogo that was filled. It doesn't have any M2 in it. You have to buy your own storage, but you can get up to 2 terabytes put into there. The only thing that I would do is take a look, when you get that, take a look at the components inside and see what they're using to send that back and forth. Sarge has been around for a while, but they are a company based out of China. So just understanding the electronics that happen inside of the enclosure is always a good thing, because then if there's any type of data breaches or anything like that, then you're well aware of it.
Yeah, I took a look at the website, and it was interesting how small this device is. So I think they're looking for some plugins that people can use with these smaller devices. And I think there's going to be it's just an interesting thing. We'll probably get more and more things as things get smaller and people shoot with phones and things like that. NVMe is one of the best storage technologies. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Particularly, they noted, he notes the iPhone 15, the fact that it has that USB-C format connector on there means that storage for that will be a big thing. Jeff Francis, dive in.
Two things I would be cautious about with this. It is a cable-less design, so it has a male USB-C connector on it that's designed to plug this directly into your phone. So I worry about the weight of that device stressing the connector on your phone. Could cause that USB-C on your phone to fail sooner. And if you have a large case on your phone, you may not make a full contact. So that's something to watch out for. Now, I guess you could get a male to female USB-C short extender to connect this.
Yeah, good points all. And I wonder if cages would help with that. But your point is well taken, boy, putting the stress on the connector. Courtney, an additional thought?
Yeah, if you look at it, it does seem to come with a little cable here that's attached in this little plastic holder here off to the side. It is, a half-length SSD, so you can't pull the full-length 2288s discs, NVMe discs, and it looks awful thick because it's shock mounted, and you really don't need shock mounting for a drive with no moving parts. The short length is good because you can stick it on the back of the iPhone and it won't interfere with the lenses, which of course you need to still see, and you don't want to put it obviously on the other side in front of your touchscreen. So it could be attached with a piece of Velcro or some type of magnetic. Maybe it has a magnetic anchor in there to attach to the MagSafe connector on the back of the iPhone. That would be cool. But I think they went a little overboard with the rubber jacketing on it.
It is only $50 US at retail, so obviously no memory inside. So you have to buy your own NVMe sticks and kind of configure it the way you want to. Mickey, you had a thought?
Yeah, I just want to note that it is the interface is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 interface and not like say a Thunderbolt capable interface. So it's limited to 10 gigabits per second, so you won't get the full throughput of an NVMe drive.
Point well taken. Let's go to the next question.
From Mike Smith in Chula Vista, California, what setup do you recommend for live streaming from 3 distinct venue locations within the church property? Main church, hall, and parish center.
That's one of our QR code questions. Mickey, start us off here.
Yeah, I definitely go with SDI either over copper, coax, SDI, or SDI over fiber, and home run all the feeds to and from the central control room.
And Jeffrey.
Yeah, being able to do this, PTZ cameras are always the best solution for a video side. Having them set up in prime spots, having it all in one control room, very important. Unless it's just not possible. I don't know how far away between the main church, hall, and parish center that they are, and if you need to have somebody inside the inside of each area to see what's going on. There's a lot of different options there, but definitely have some sort of PTZ option so you can have one person controlling the whole thing from a central location.
There we go. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, do you think that the supply chain issues with Yamaha products will improve? I had to search the entire U.S. for my DM3D and found one in stock in Hawaii.
Yeah, we've been hearing about this for a long time. Nigel, what's your opinion about supply chain stuff?
So I checked the Yamaha supply chain. I don't see anything particular that's a problem that's obvious from my quick search. So that doesn't mean they aren't having parts problems. We know A to D converters were hard to get for a long time, but it might lead you to other conclusions. So when supply chain is when you can't get hold of a product, it could signal that it's end of lifing at some point, so they're starting to reduce production. It could be a problem with distribution. We know sometimes European manufacturers struggle in the US. So if you want parts, Behringer, it's easy to get them in Europe, for example. So there could be lots of reasons for it. So there is not clear that they are having A to D converter problems, which is where the other issues were. But you never know. You might want to check whether that product is a bit long in the tooth.
Courtney Gooden.
And breaking news, I did hear overnight there was a 7.1 earthquake off the coast of Taiwan. So let's hope it didn't upset TSMC, which will disrupt all of our chip manufacturers for the next year or so if they had to go offline or were damaged in any way. So I haven't seen all the latest news yet, but check your news because there was that, and that could cause a disruption.
You know, I was thinking when that huge container ship just hit the bridge on the East Coast, I was thinking, boy, that was coming inbound into the U.S., but when I saw that massive stack of containers, I thought, my gosh, if that was something coming into the U.S., imagine the number of orders that would probably have been disrupted just from that one supply chain disaster that nobody anticipated. It's amazing that things arrive where they do with as much regularity as do, in my opinion. But interesting world. Let's go to the next question.
From Craig Kadoki in Toronto, on a Mac, how do you deal with multiple USB-C to Ethernet adapters since each one has to be set up individually in system preferences? I understand that this is a security feature, but with a home and work dock plus several dongles, it can take extra time.
Jeff Francis, start us off.
So I use the built-in Mac system prefs in the networks. There's locations. So if you go to locations, you can set up and save your various locations. Also, I find it really helpful if you select one of your dongles in the left side there and you go down to the bottom at the little tool gear icon, you can rename your adapters. So it's helpful to name, your home and your work and those devices there.
Mickey.
Yeah, for situations where you're going to place repeatedly, like at home and into work, I would just leave a dongle connected to the Ethernet cable at each location that way, and I label them so I know this dongle is my Dante dongle, and this one is like the production network dongle, and so I know how each one is already configured right at the point that I'm plugging them in. If your issue is something like you're setting static IP addresses, I typically would set my NICs to DHCP, and I assign reserved IP addresses on the DHCP server.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question.
From Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Yesterday, I think there was that question about the new Yamaha mixer and how to remotely access it. An issue to VPNs blocking or not forwarding multicast, etc. I use Zero Tier as an overlay VPN, so that surely should mitigate that. Surely?
Mickey, what do you think? Have you investigated?
Yeah, the question was yesterday, I believe, was from Douglas Carmichael, and he's using Tailscale. And what you need to do there is to enable what Tailscale calls a subnet router within your Tailscale client. This subnet router feature allows other members of your Tailscale network to have access to the resources at the remote network where the subnet router is.
There you go. So that should hopefully help you, Peter, or sort it all out. Let's get on to the next question.
From Morgan Price, Victoria, British Columbia. What's interesting in Keynote's new release? I see version 14.0 on the iPad today.
Yeah, I was surprised at that upgrade, too, that came out overnight. Jeffrey, have you looked into it?
No, I guess it took us all by surprise, but from what I see from online, it basically says it adds a new look to slides with dynamic color, minimalist light, and minimalist dark themes, streamlined in-app notifications to inform you when a person joins a collaborative presentation. You can preserve file formats in full quality when adding HEIC photos taken on your iPhone or your iPad, and improved compatibility for slide transitions when importing and exporting Microsoft PowerPoint files. Why would anybody want to do that? And additional stability and performance improvements from there. So there's a few really nice features on there. I'll definitely be downloading it and testing it out today after NDI.
Yeah, I was surprised. It's a pretty big jump, 13.2 to 14. That usually signals some sort of internal reconfiguring, and only Apple knows exactly why. And I'm guessing entirely. I have no particular knowledge about that. But, we have 14.0, so we're in a new generation now. Let's get to the next question.
From Tulog Lopez Waterman in Santa Fe, New Mexico, considering a new purchase SSD for recording, what is the current trusted drive with good reliability and speed?
Mickey, what say you?
So yeah, you mentioned recording, but I think it would be good to know exactly what you are recording and what hardware or software you're using to record. Most cameras and also like audio recording, hardware recording devices have an approved media list. So I would consult that first. As for me, like for general purpose SSDs, I've mostly switched over to the OWC Envoy and also the OWC Express 1 M2.
I've had the same kind of experience, ever since I got snapped with the fact that some of those Samsung T4s, T3s, there was a generation when we had problems. I mean, they were really reliable, used them all the time. Then they did a generational change and we had problems for a while. I've been sticking with OWC stuff because I know their engineering department back of the house really tests things thoroughly before they send them out, and I found them to be extraordinarily reliable myself. Mickey, you had another thought?
Yeah, I just see Tlaloc mentioned in the chat that this is for a Mac Mini and recording on LiveMind. I would certainly do the math first on how much storage you need, and also how much throughput, total throughput you need, and of course add some overhead over that, both on the capacity and the throughput. If this is a single recording machine that you're using with no redundancy, no secondary recording machine, I would probably look at some sort of RAID array. It doesn't have to be, if the throughput can be handled by spinning disks, it doesn't have to be SSD based, but I would look at a RAID 1 or RAID 5 or RAID 10 array.
There you go. Let's get to our next question.
Jeff Cohen from Miami Beach, Florida, via our QR code system. Watch party right after office hours? This Apple-like promo from Frame.io has me intrigued, and there is a link here for Frame.io/coming soon.
Oh, they've got some announcements. Jeffrey Powers, do you know anything about this?
Yeah, Adobe and Frame.io. There's going to be a bunch of announcements pre-NAB, that's for sure. This actually is not going to happen until April 9th, not today, because the question kind of framed towards it being later today, but that's not the case. It's actually going to be April 9th, and I think it's at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time. So a watch party is not impossible if you want to be the help be part of it, as in moderate it, definitely.
Yeah, the after hours usually opens up, and we have some great discussions there. So if you want to watch the announcements live in real time and discuss them, that is something that Office Hours has been known to do on regular occasions. Also, don't forget, thank you so very much for your questions. They do drive our show. And so if you have any thoughts, remember you can use the QR code, or you can use you can go to askofficehoursglobal.com and pop in your questions there. Vote on those questions, and we will get to whatever you think is the most important as we go through the show. All right. That said, Courtney, did you have some?
I was just going to say I looked at the promo and it goes to 4. That's basically what the promo says. 4.
For what?
I don't know. It's a teaser. It's a teaser promo. It looks very Apple-esque, where it reveals a little piece of the 4, and it ends up with a 4. It goes to 4.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next question.
From Andy Korkendorfer, Vieira, Florida. Interesting VoIP production system for House of Worship. Thoughts? And this is a YouTube link.
Yeah, I wasn't able to take the time to look at that, and I'd hoped somebody else was. Oh, maybe Jeff Francis has. Jeff, did you see what this was all about?
No, it's a 56-minute video, so I haven't had time to look at that since I saw the question pop up. I did the thing that caught my mind, as always with YouTube, is the comments, and someone basically said, "I saw the pastor mixing on an iPad," and as an audio engineer, my heart stopped for a moment there. But this would be a good dive. Bring this question back after we've had a chance to take a look at it, unless somebody else took the time to look through that.
Yeah, let's see who else has seen it today. And Mickey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that this is not a VoIP production system, but a AV over IP production system.
So there's no voice involved. It's just audio video signals through an internet connection. Okay. Jeffrey?
Yeah, there was a question that was earlier that basically said what resources, and this is Churchfront, and this is one of those YouTube resources that you can go to find out how they're setting up their churches. So from what I've seen, it looks pretty impressive, but it's a pretty long video to be sprung on within the last 5 minutes. So.
So maybe hold on to your question, resubmit it tomorrow after everybody's had a chance to dig around, and we'll hear some more about it, and we'll talk about it. Let's go on to our next question.
From Vincent Mitz in Louisiana, the company Strata released a video showing how Apple's Vision Pro can change filmmaking forever. Do you think the Vision Pro could serve a role in future production? And there is a YouTube link.
Courtney Gooden's going to start us out here. Courtney?
Hi, this is Michael Cioni does the demo, which he does great because he's a master of the demo, live demo. Not a live demo. This is a well-produced video showing how to use the Vision Pro in production. But they're touting it as something the focus puller could use to pull focus on. And right now, focus pullers have their own 15-inch monitor, which they move around. They said, well, the focus puller needs to have mobility. Well, not if his vision is blocked by the Vision Pro, and he's looking through the cameras that are on the front of the thing. Also, the Vision Pro does emit infrared, which could be a problem in some cases with some cameras. The other thing is you're going to have a power supply to walk around with because the thing's going to only run for about an hour and a half, and on a 13-hour production day, I don't see the camera assistants wanting to wear this thing for very long. So I'm a bit skeptical. Also, the way that you have to get the signal to it is much more complex than just running an SDI cable from Video Assist or from the DIT cart to your camera monitor for the focus pullers. It's much too complex, I think, for this. I think they're reaching to try and find some possible use for the Vision Pro.
Jeffrey Powers.
So it looks pretty impressive, and of course, everybody has said the first Vision Pro has always been the beta model for things. But we have seen production stuff come through. Adam Tow's put Mix Effect Pro into the Vision Pro, so things like that will be perfect for whatever you do. Having the wireless connection, even if we get into 6E and 7 wireless, there's still always the chance that the headset could disconnect in the middle of a very important shot. So being able to connect a Vision Pro, because there's one point where they're showing somebody moving their head to move a camera, and which would be great. But once again, if the connection gets disconnected, then all of a sudden that shot is worthless because the camera could just stop, or maybe it'll have some sort of predictive idea as to which way that the person is turning their head. But we'll see what happens from there. Having a wired connection is always a good idea. Having a backup is always a better idea. So if they can do all of that, then it works from there. As for smaller productions, if this becomes software and hardware, that makes it easier for smaller productions to get better video and audio created from that with the Vision Pro. I'm all for it. I'm always for anything that's going to advance us technology-wise. So we'll see what happens, and we'll definitely be seeing a video or a movie that's basically said made with the help of Vision Pro somewhere down the line.
I've been interesting watching. I see no need for one at this point, but I was reading something from Casey Neistat, who just did a thing, and in the the article that I read, he said something about, having an 11-foot editing interface that he could work with. And then he said something about walking up to get a closer look at his timeline. And that stopped me for a moment. And I said, well, that's weird. I would have thought that if you moved around, the screen would maintain its distance. But I guess there's something in the system that allows you to literally walk up to this high-resolution production like you were walking up to a whiteboard at the front of the office and get a closer look at details in this high-resolution world. And that was interesting to me. I hadn't thought about the Z-axis, essentially, and being able to approach things that are virtual that you're seeing in front of you. Sounds pretty intriguing, but Nigel, thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to point out, you can lock it in space. So theoretically, you can lock your timeline, walk into another room, and your timeline stays in the room that you left it in. So you could leave, things all over the house, and as you walk in where they were. So they actually, there's lots of demonstrations of people doing that, so that they stay locked almost to the GPS position in space that you left them. So you could absolutely walk up to them. So I feel the need to balance the thing here. I sense that the thing I got into a huge debate on the other day with somebody on some network about Apple Vision Pro, and they were saying, "Oh, it's a failure. It's never going to succeed, and it's never going to work," and because it's not solving any problem. And I remember, the first iPhone. I had the first iPhone, and the fact you couldn't make a phone call on it, which was a bit of a challenge. I think we're very early on. We're in a proof of concept. I think this is an MVP. It's a minimum viable product. I think they need to build ecosystems around it. So my guess is you haven't seen all the things that they think this can do, and they've probably sold out anyway. So that's worth remembering.
Courtney, you want to come back in on?
Yeah, and as far as using it as a focus pulling monitor, there's a lot of tricks that focus pullers. They always want to have their monitor that does peaking, and there's most of these monitors that they're using for pulling focus have tools on them for magnification and for showing, red peaking, red highlights with edge detection, so they can get a fine focus with peaking showing on the monitor itself. And I don't think there's an app yet that does this on the Vision Pro, except for maybe the red iPhone app, but that's only has an input from an iPhone. So if you're shooting with an iPhone, maybe, but if you're shooting from an Alexa or something else in a professional situation, I don't see this happening. Also, if it sticks the monitor on the wall somewhere, and the guy's moving around, he's going to have to be walking around and looking back at his monitor stuck to the wall. I don't see it being practical.
Okay, well, we'll see. I mean, at some point, hopefully we've been here for 4 years. We'll be here 4 years in the future with luck, and we'll be able to look back and see how it all shook out. Let's go on to the next question.
Talak Lopez Waterman from Santa Fe, New Mexico has a follow-up question. A Mac Mini I'm using for recording also has a couple of BMD Ultra Studios attached to the 2 USB ports. What is the most trusted hub to be able to continue to use both plus 2 external drives?
Mickey's going to start us off. Mickey?
Yeah, I assume the Mac Mini in question is a not the Mac Mini Pro, because the Mac Mini Pro has 4 Thunderbolt ports. I would definitely, as much as possible, keep the Ultra Studios on dedicated Thunderbolt controllers, just so that you have all the throughput there available for the interfaces. But if you do have to split up the Thunderbolt ports, I would go for the OWC Thunderbolt dock or the Thunderbolt Pro dock. Alternatively, if the amount of throughput you need for the storage can be contained within the 10 gigabits per second of the USB-A ports, then I'd get USB-A drives that you can plug into those ports instead, or through a hub, or a NAS connected to the network port.
And Jeff Francis.
I would go with Mickey's choice of the OWC or the CalDigit. CalDigit has a new Thunderbolt hub that's got a whole slew of USB ports on it. This is their TS4 from CalDigit.
Nice. All right. Let's go on to the next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania writes in, yesterday's Unreal Engine and Zoom show was awesome. What audio challenges do we face merging participant mics and effects in Unreal?
I agree. Yesterday was really a ton of fun. And for those of you who are interested in Unreal, Nick Justison's going to come in and going to be here on Tuesdays to kind of walk us through this amazing new capability to build virtual worlds and do things inside of them. Courtney, what were your thoughts from yesterday?
Yeah, I was worried. I didn't ask him, but to see what the latency is. But I believe the latency in Unreal is very, very short because, of course, they use it in virtual sets all the time, so that the camera operator and the background has to react almost instantaneously to camera moves. So if it didn't, you would see lags, and the camera moves wouldn't be very good. So Unreal doesn't process audio, so he mentioned processing audio separately from your Zoom recipients or for whatever camera, for whatever computer you're bringing those recipients in on. They're going to have to split out the audio and run it through a separate device to mix the three together, I believe is what he said, right?
Yeah,
so
it's probably
you could run it through some. If there is any latency issue, you may have to delay the individual people to sync them up with their images on the screen in Unreal.
Yeah, and I was thinking when he was talking about that, it's really very much what I do here every day. I run my audio through my Universal Audio Apollo Solo, merge them afterwards, so the camera stream is coming in through one set of circuits and the audio is coming in through another. It gets merged. I did have problems in the first months of the show with some lags and things like that. They have mostly seemed to be taken care of now. So I think the technology in the back and the engineering talent that we employ here at Office Hours on the back have kind of made that go away. And I haven't really thought about it in the last 3 or 4 months. Everything just seems to be in sync and work smoothly. You can never guarantee that because you're dealing with the World Wide Web and sending signals down. And we've all been in circumstances where suddenly there are lags in audio performance versus video and the rest. But it has gotten better in my experience with a Zoom other software connection and working in a meeting like ours every day. Let's go on to the next question.
Jeff Francis from Columbia, South Carolina, and here on the panel. Any April Fool product announcements you wish were real products? I, for one, want the Newman KMSP salt and pepper shaker set. Newman, take my money.
Neumann, very high resolution salt grains, I'm going to expect. Nigel, start us off.
No, but there was a question which I think has disappeared about Xbox and NVIDIA, and that NVIDIA had bought the Xbox license from Microsoft. That question, if you were watching it, has disappeared. That was an April Fool's announcement. That would have been a very interesting change in the video games market, which AMD has really controlled for a long time now. But so there's some that still sneak through.
I saw that one and I was, wait, what? Then I got distracted and I couldn't go back to it. Jeff Francis.
So I'm going to show you the post here from Neumann and just how gorgeous this is. There's your little salt and pepper shakers in the form of a KM184 and a 183 and a lovely dual microphone holder to set on your table. Neumann, actually make this. People will buy it. People
just
will
for
buy
setting
it.
up the shot, I can see the sea salt pile, but how did they, what is that, like carbon or something? How did they get a pile of pepper? It's hard to style those kind of shoots. That's really cool. Mickey?
Yeah, I would definitely get a pair of those, and also if they made one in the size of the U47 with an actual grinder in it, I'll get that as well.
People will be twisting their capsules off left and right. Jeffrey.
More OH, but the Dole banana peel sleeping bag, so you can traverse the world in a banana sleeping bag.
Wait a second, that's going to totally mess up banana for scale. You're saying there's a 6 foot or 7 foot tall banana that you can sleep in?
Only if you put it next to unless you put it next to a banana, then it's for scale, and then it continues to be for scale.
My banana for scale for my banana. Anyway, let's move on to the next question.
From Chad Lafarge, Columbia, Missouri. With the recent earthquake in Taiwan in mind, is any progress being made to diversify our tech supply chain? Outside of the obvious human impact, where will the world feel the results?
Oh, interesting question. Jeffrey Powers, start us off here.
Yeah, being able to diversify, that's a tough one. I mean, lots of people throw out different ideas, but the end of the day, there's a lot of environmental factors that are involved that make it almost impossible to put it in other places. As for the impact that we see, of course, the earthquake happened just this morning, so we won't see any type of results. I saw some of the things that happened. Only 9 people have been reported that passed away from this earthquake. And then, of course, Taiwan, which is one of those areas that gets a lot of earthquakes, has structural setup for to handle bigger earthquakes like this. Although I've saw a few buildings topple over. That just happens as it goes. So we'll see what happens with these companies if that interrupts their production, or if they can go with maybe a week later and start up with their production again.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, the earthquake was a 7.4. I misstated earlier, 7.4, which is pretty big, and it was right on the coast of Taiwan. I'm not sure how far TSMC was from that. There was a lot of building damage, and like I said, it just happened a number of hours ago, so reports are still coming in. TSMC has plans to build, and they've already started building the first one, 2 plants in Arizona, which should help the supply chain. But they postponed the second plant. They broke ground, I think, on the first plant. But it's still going to be, these are $40 billion plants. And it takes several years to build them. The second one isn't planned to start building until 2027 or 2028. So it's going to be a number of years. There are plans to relieve the bottleneck of chip manufacturing coming out of the Far East. But it's going to take them a few years to get them up and running here in America.
Yeah. Nigel?
Yeah, I think Courtney said it well. The other thing I would tell you as well, we just tend to talk about TSMC as if they're the only chip provider. They are the most advanced chip provider. There are other chip providers. Global Foundries operates a huge number of fabs around the place. Intel operates a number of fabs. Should something happen in Taiwan, and of course we know the complex issues with China, it would be very disruptive, but it's not quite the end of the world. What people who need chips would have to do is to go back to Samsung, who's part of the Global Foundries Alliance, there's Intel, there's a number of other manufacturers, and they would, like we saw during COVID, look to resource. So you'll find delays. You won't find the latest, fastest, because TSMC has those processors, but you'll find alternate things. But the reality of, like most things, is the biggest planning is hoping that it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I was reading something just the other day about their move from, I guess they're down at 3 nanometers now and talking about 2 as the next generation. And it's just almost unbelievably dense. And so that requires extraordinary manufacturing techniques in TSMC. I was also reading another story about TSMC talking about it being the most important company on the planet, only in terms of the fact that it's doing so much leading edge research that continues to drive all the rest of technology as these things get more powerful and smaller constantly. It's a fascinating game. Nigel, do you have a last comment?
Yeah, and don't forget, TSMC uses equipment from people like Applied Materials that are actually made in the US and other places. So, well, they have the chemistry down. They're often using equipment that is sourced from other companies. So it wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be simple, but they could go back and recreate those elsewhere.
Courtney?
And I just did read that TSMC did open a big fab just in February in Japan. So that one is open and running now. So that could alleviate some of the Chinese bottleneck.
I used to follow pretty closely the Chandler fab, which is the TSMC one in Arizona, and they were having all sorts of difficulty. They were flying in a lot of technical talent, but they were also desperately trying to hire to staff up the building of the fab. So I think there's a relative shortage of construction people who can work to the tolerances to build one of these amazing factories. And I just remember seeing constant stories in Business Journal and other places about them recruiting literally globally, trying to assemble the team to make this thing happen and keep it on schedule. Not the easiest thing in the world. So Anyway, moving on to the next question.
David Brady from New York City. Is Companion satellite limited to Elgato devices only? I was hoping to use an X-Keys device via satellite, but the scan function doesn't detect the device.
Jeffrey Powers, can you solve this for David?
I've been reading up a little bit from your question yesterday, David, on using X-Keys and Stream Deck here. And there's a lot on GitHub, people just trying to figure out ways to use X-Keys as a Stream Deck itself. And so I haven't really downloaded anything to test it out. But the satellite software itself is also on GitHub. So if you have somebody that can program in X-key commands and USB connections, then it's very possible to do that. But natively, of course, it's going to work perfect on a Stream Deck. Just buy a Stream Deck.
Next question.
Robert Soji from here in Los Angeles. Can the panelists recommend a sub-$200 mic boom stand for interviews?
Mickey?
So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Manfrotto 420 Bravo stand. It's not exactly it's just a little over $200. I think it's like 210 or 220 US. But they do the job great. They fold up just like any other light stand. And when you open it up, you stretch the first two sections out. You pull the first two sections out, and there is a latch that will allow you to boom it. Which this is my go-to for hanging microphones for sit-down interviews. They are very robust. I have, I think, 5 of them at the moment, and with the oldest one being certainly over 10 years old, probably close to 15 years old.
Do you remember what the price point is, Mickey? Is it? Are we?
It's like I think 200, just a little bit over 200 US.
Okay, so within shouting distance there. Jeff Francis, your thoughts?
Great choice. 230 without a sandbag and 275 with a sandbag for that item. And I will say mic stands is not a place to attempt to save money. A little bit of extra to buy quality. Manfrotto, K&M also makes great stands, but this is a better choice for a over-the-head boom interview style. K&M's a lot more expensive to get up to those kind of heights and reach.
You don't want to trust your $2,000 chefs on top of a $29 stand? I'm shocked. Courtney Gooden.
Shameless pro plug. I invented the Pocket Boom Man many years ago. You can buy them from True Audio, the Good Sound C-stand adapter. And for only $19.95, this little adapter will adapt the 3/8 inch screw on the end into your microphone shock mount, and the other end is 5/8 slips over the end of a C-stand arm. So you just use any C-stand on the set can then become a microphone boom with a boom arm. And so you can extend it out, and the knuckle of the C-stand goes on the opposite end where the mic is, and so you can use that to kind of counterbalance the mic. And they work quite well, and you can carry them around in your pocket.
I'm going to do a public service announcement and say if you go to the True Audio website, do not blame anybody for the amount of time you lose out of your life hanging out there. Jeffrey Powers.
So I would recommend for about $100, Newer has a heavy-duty light stand and microphones boom that you can use. It does come with a matching sandbag on there, but if you want to purchase a little bit more, about $160, Newer has the C-stands available, and those work really well for lights and for mic booms.
And Mickey, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just want to mention that. Yeah, yes, you can use a C-stand with a gobo arm on it, but the Manfrotto 420B has a boom that could extend almost 2 meters. And I want to reiterate as well what Jeff mentioned earlier, that you don't want to skimp on the stand. And Bill, you mentioned the microphone, and yes, if a microphone falls down, it's painful, but that's nothing compared to the possible injury you could cause on people, and also the damage to reputation if a mic stand falls on, say, a talent, or a stand, any kind of stand falls on a talent, be it a C stand or a light stand or a microphone stand falls on talent or on a client who you're interviewing.
Absolutely. And, it's no small thing that each one of these says, here's your sandbag to go with it. If you're putting up any kind of stand around talent, make sure you bag things correctly. There's actually video on the websites about how precisely to sandbag the correct leg in the correct direction and things like that, so you don't make that error and have things tip over. Let's go on to the next question.
From Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, pop filters can be essential for eliminating plosives from audio-only productions, but sometimes they can appear intrusive when a guest is using one on camera. What tips does the panel have to minimize its appearance or potential eliminate its need?
Mickey, help us out.
Yeah, I'd definitely think through what the priorities are for this interview or contribution or whatever it may be, whatever the production is. If you want to increase the visual aesthetic of it by removing like a large pop filter, have the guest be in a more controlled environment, wherein it would allow you to have a different type of microphone that is placed further away and not in the line of the talent's breath, like say like a hypercardioid just off frame, for example. It's less forgiving than say a microphone right in front of the talent's mouth, but you would have a much cleaner frame that again comes with having to have that talent in a studio or an environment that is much more controlled in terms of noise.
Jeffrey Powers.
I will say this, I've said this before, I'll say it again, might irritate some people, but windscreen is not a pop filter, and a pop filter is not a windscreen, because you definitely need some distance between the pop filter and the microphone, because basically what happens is your sound's coming in like this, and what a pop filter will do is it'll separate it like this. So if you've got the capsule right here, it has absolutely no time to separate enough so those plosives do get through on a windscreen. Now, if you put in a thicker windscreen, all that's doing is that's affecting the sound of the microphone. So you want to have that pop filter because it's a nice thin layer to get to the microphone for better sound. But you can do a little bit of angling to the corner. It depends on how tuned you really want that sound to be and how on spot. Because once you start moving away from the mouth, you're running into newer problems.
Nigel.
I've noticed the three phases of internet stardom. No mic in shot, terrible sound. Mic in shot to show I have a proper mic. Mic taken out of shot to show I don't need to show my mic. I think it will often depend on where they are in these three phases of micdom.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of interesting things as the rise of influencers and people really who came in. Some of them are fabulous, but came in without formal training and hadn't worked in sound recording facilities or radio stations or things like that, where everything you do is important for clarifying sound. We've seen a lot of – I actually over and over again have seen people using mics with a pattern in a way that just doesn't support that pattern, if not completely reversing. And it's something that happens. Courtney, you have a last comment in the next 15, 20 seconds?
Well, as the only person on the panel here without a microphone in the shot here, I can comment that you can carefully position the microphone. Mine is right here, just out of shot. And it's still, I can scrape it with my little finger if I'm touching my thumb to my mouth. So it's within 6 inches of my mouth, and it puts it out of the way of the plosives so that you can position it carefully with just a windscreen on it instead of a pop filter and keep it out of the shot if it's a cardioid condenser. If it's a cardioid condenser, yeah, if you have a high LPR 40, you're not going to get very good sound if it gets off axis of your microphone, of your mouth, and further away than about 5 inches.
All right, we've got some cool stuff coming up. I want to mention this before we make the transition at the top of the hour. Don't forget this coming Monday, we'll be covering the total eclipse starting right here at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're going to do a series of live inserts from around the world, at least around North America, as the eclipse traverses out of Mexico into Texas, all the way up to the northeast and finally moves over us. So if you're interested in watching the total solar eclipse, this is your chance. We'll be here doing it live. One other thing that I wanted to touch base on, the National Association of Broadcasters convention happens in 11 days, starting on Sunday, April 14th. We are going to have a full team of folks who will be doing this show live from the NAB show floor. So get ready for that. We'll have special shows, speaking of that, tomorrow and Friday, looking in more depth at the coverage we have planned. So if you want to enjoy a virtual trip to NAB and kind of indulge your gear acquisition syndrome, this will be heaven for you right here. We'll be back in just a couple seconds with our special guest. We are very excited today to welcome our second hour guest. Most of you know that Wednesdays our focus is typically on sound production arts. And in that spirit today we have Andrew M. Edwards, a composer whose music blends influences from various styles across film, TV, podcasts, and other media. Drew has worked on documentaries, science fiction projects, art house narratives, and has various projects underway currently, including a film he scored to debut May 4th at the Portland Festival up there. So welcome, Drew Edwards. How are you this morning?
I'm good, Bill. Thanks.
It's so great to have you here. Let me start with this. We all understand the great score is typically one of the huge key elements in any great cinematic works, the movies and the other shows that we all love. So let me start by asking you, what were your first inspirations for pursuing a career in this area?
Well, I definitely didn't start out aiming at pursuing a career in this area, but I landed here with, both feet sort of on the ground. But as a kid, I'm a Gen Xer, and I grew up in the Star Wars sweet spot. So the second movie I ever saw in the theater was the first Star Wars movie. The one that really got me, though, there were two films. We talked about this yesterday, but there are two movies that really planted it in my head. One was and mostly because I got them on cassette tape, and so I could listen to them over and over again. One was The Empire Strikes Back, and I loved how when you listened to the soundtrack, you could tell what was happening in the movie. Like it's so evocative of the story that you're like, oh, right, that's when Yoda's lifting the thing out of the thing. And then the other one that I loved was the Flash Gordon score from like 1981, which is Queen and Howard, I can never remember his last name, but the guy who did the orchestral stuff from that, the Flash, score. Mm-hmm. But anyway, those just filled me with life and growing up with all the great pop music in the 80s. And then my parents, my mom's big classical music, or was a big classical music person, and my dad's a big musical theater person. So I grew up sort of at the intersection of all of sort of pop music, film music, musical theater.
Must have been great to be in your house on the weekends to listen to music.
There was a lot. I mean, I associate pieces of music with my parents just because they played it over and over and over again, for sure. Yeah.
Very nice. Now, your career spans film, TV. You've worked in podcasts, web videos. You noted dance and theater, the concert stage, video games. That's a pretty wide range. When you approach a project, can you walk us through a little bit about how you kind of settle yourself into what you're going to be aiming for?
Well, I'm a lot of composers, like if you're just writing for the concert stage all the time, it's very solitary. It's very isolating, and you spend a lot of torturous alone time wrestling with the muse, as it were. But whenever you're writing for media or any sort of presentational thing, you get to collaborate with other people, which I really thrive on. I really enjoy that aspect of it. So I try to go in and hear what is needed for the music, because the music that also when you're writing for the concert stage, you're the thing. But when you're working with, film or a podcast or whatever, you're supporting something. The music has a function. It's like cabinets. and so you're basically sort of building musical cabinetry custom for whatever project you're working on. And
that's a great metaphor.
The kind of cabinets, it's John Williams's, I'm stealing it, but everyone has different taste, and they want different knobs and different colors and different styles of cabinets, and so every project, it just depends on what the client wants. And then obviously I have my filters and my taste, and I bring that to the table. But the collaborative aspect is the thing that I really enjoy the most.
As I was looking on your website, you mentioned things like 60s sci-fi, 70s minimalism, 80s synth. It seems like you have just an incredibly broad range of influences. So how do you decide, if you're going to sit down and do something, just a project for your own self, how do you decide which of the various genres excites you and what you want to do about it?
It's not even about picking one genre. It's about that I'm like a magpie, right? I take little bits of everything. So like I recently scored the film that's premiering on May 4th in Portland was shot in black and white. It's a noir, like a detective noir spoof. So in the vein of like Mel Brooks or like Airplane, the Zucker brothers. And I knew I had to hit it like straight on, and it kind of takes place in the 30s, but I put a bunch of 60s elements in it, like bongos and spring reverb and that kind of thing, just because that it just worked for me, and then throwing in some synthesizers wherever possible. And so it just kind of depends. I'm a magpie, so I try to, I feel like every composer is, though, like every composer sort of takes little tiny things from, it's kind of like AI, right? Except we're really doing it. Takes little bits from other people and sort of run it through our own filters, and then whatever comes out is sort of becomes our style eventually. So,
absolutely. When I was reading, another thing that struck me on your website was the quote you had about seeking out new things, books, movies, art. You mentioned them all, theater, as you mentioned, to challenge yourself and broaden your horizons with experiences. And I noticed the line, interesting artists have interesting lives. That intrigued me. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I taught for many years in the master's, the MFA program at Columbia College, Chicago. So I had new students coming through. New graduate students coming through every year wanting to be aspiring film composers. And one thing I noticed was a lot of them would just be listening to film music all the time. And then you read an interview with, say, John Powell, who's a celebrated, well-known film composer, How to Train Your Dragon, The Bourne Identity. And someone asked him if he listens to film music like in his downtime. And his answer was profane, but he said blank, no. And so I would challenge him, like, listen to stuff, have you ever listened to heavy metal? Like, go find metal you like. Like, have you ever listened to, country or bluegrass, like R&B, like whatever. Like if you just stay, I'm going to go on a side track. I'm reading a really interesting book right now called Filter World. I can't remember the author's name, but the subtitle is How Algorithms Flattened Culture. And one of the things nowadays, like those film composers just listening to film music and becoming like a loop, we're so used to having stuff presented to us because of what a recommendation algorithm knows of our data and what we've watched before, like on a streaming platform, for example. So everything is kind of in this safe bubble and it's just fed to you. And we don't have the experience of, like, I'm dating myself, but walking through a Blockbuster video and seeing some weird movie that you'd never heard of before and finding the cover attractive and grabbing it and checking it out and watching it and being like, whoa, I'd never heard of this. Guys, check out this crazy movie. That whole thing happens so less frequently now. And I think part of my leading an interesting life is you have to go out and, like, accidentally find stuff. You have to maybe sit through something you didn't think you'd like, and at the end you liked it. Or, understand why, Mark Rothko paintings are hanging in a museum, even though you're like, that's just blue. Why is that art? I think asking those questions and accidentally finding things and interacting with things that challenge us, and not just being, safely inside of a bubble of the familiar, I think is what gives people, edge, first of all, but also just gives you an interesting point of view. If you don't do anything outside of a prescribed sort of zone, there are no edges.
That hugely resonates with me, because I felt the same thing. When I start to see the same stuff hitting my feeds on social media and things like that over and over again, I realize that it's watched me and it's trying to feed me what I like. But exactly to your point, that's not stretching me into finding things that I've never experienced before that may be equally or more important to my development as a human being. So getting out of there. The other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, since you work with orchestral scores, the first time I ever picked up in manuscript form an orchestral score, I was like, whoa, all of these lines and stays and parts, and it just seems incredibly complex. As you're scoring something, I think we talked a little bit about you have some programs or things like that you work with, or maybe some scores you can show us to kind of give the audience an idea of what that looks like.
One thing it's really interesting is when I was teaching, I wanted to sort of break down a really good piece of orchestration for my students so that they could see what was actually going on. So I took and I used John Williams because he's better at orchestrating than 95% of humans, maybe 99% of humans. But anyway, he just knows the orchestra better than anybody. And so I went through and with 4 highlighters, and I was like, I'm just going to sort of color code the score so I can sort of break it down. And 9 times out of 10, there are 2 things happening in the orchestra with him. There's an accompaniment and there's a melody. And then the other 2 colors were just like sort of accent things.
Interesting.
And like the occasional counter melody. But more often than not, it's just 2 things. And if you think about his big Superman, march, the orchestra is just going bump-a-da-bump-a-dum, and you look at the score and it's literally 70 people are going bump-a-da-bump-a-dum,
really, that much unison going,
and 5 brass players are playing the melody. So the reason that that good orchestrations are impactful is because it's strength in numbers. The more people you have playing your idea, the bigger the idea sounds, because you have more people playing it. So like I said, it's, the orchestra is basically a giant synthesizer. You're just dialing in waveforms, right? The oboe is a sine wave. The clarinet's a square wave. The strings are saw waves, and sort of the brass. So like you're just using it like a synthesizer. So when you think about it that way, it becomes less about all the individual lines and more about how those individual lines are working together to create like a big, powerful, impactful, hopefully emotionally resonant sound.
When you're writing that, do you think about how the conductor and or the orchestra is going to interpret it? Do you leave room for interpretation, or do you try to put onto the paper how you want it to sound?
It's interesting. There are 2 ways. It depends on what you're doing. In musical theater, if you're writing for stage, the orchestra gets to rehearse.
Okay.
And when you get to rehearse, a few, say 4 or 5 times at least before the show goes up, you can work through stuff. So you can leave that a little bit more. And often in theater, you've got to, hold this chord until somebody says a line, and then you have to move on. So you've got to leave room for that kind of thing to happen because of just the nature of theater.
The practicalities of working with another team of artists.
Correct. But when you're recording in Los Angeles for a film score, I don't know how many of you know this, but most of the time what you're hearing in the movie, when you go see a movie in the theater, is probably the second take and probably the second time that they've read that piece of music. So they have to sight read it perfectly, and they do it over and over again. They're just incredible musicians in Los Angeles. So you have to put everything that they need to know in the moment on the page, because what you don't want in a recording session out there is this. Like, I have a question.
I have a problem. Okay.
Right? Because it just kills time. It just burns through time, and time is money. And you have 50 minutes to record 5 minutes of music. Usually that's how the schedule goes. So you just have to crank it. And if anything is left up to interpretation, you have no idea what they're going to play, because, you know, that musician's experience is different from yours. So if you put, you know, do the thing on the page, you have no idea what they're going to do. So in that case, you have to be as clear, concise, and specific as you possibly can be, so that the first time they read through it, it's a usable take.
So scoring a 2-hour movie has to be a little different a thought exercise than doing something for a web video or something like that. What's the shortest form you've been comfortable working in to still express your ideas, and then compare that to the longer forms?
I've done minute long,
really,
like short films for like micro short festivals before. I don't think that's, you know, my most memorable work.
Well, but in that sense, how do you get a theme established and burned in so that you can't really, can you?
No, you have to think differently than thematically. You have to sort of think motivically or texturally in terms of like how you want. Because if you have a minute to tell something, you need everyone watching it to be like immersed in the vibe, like right instantly, at the outset. Yeah. So it's less about melody and more about like just sucking you into whatever world the director wants you to be in.
I also noticed you've worked on. Oh, go ahead. No, continue.
Oh, I was just going to, for the second part of your question, when you work on longer form things, you just have to be really, really organized. You have to, you know, you sit down with the director when you first get the film and spot it, which is where you go through and note all the points, start and end points where music has to go. So when you start out, you have a roadmap. And I have a guy named Shai Rosau, who's out here in LA, is a music editor and composer, and he created a Google sheet that will do a whole bunch of math for you. So you punch in after I spot a film, I punch it all into this spreadsheet, and then I say when the deadline is, and then I cheat it back a week to give myself a buffer, and it'll tell me how much music per day I have to write to make that deadline.
Oh, I love that.
So this is how technology helps us, but like,
well, this is the real world.
Yeah. I mean, I have to deliver the cabinets on time. So,
exactly.
So, and being able to deliver on time is hugely important. So yeah, just being very, very organized. I have an unfortunate tendency to start at the beginning of movies and go through chronologically, just because that's kind of how my brain works. But usually a better way to do that is to find like a big impactful sequence in the middle of the film and score that first with like all of your themes turned up to 11, and then sort of extrapolate out from that for the rest of the film. But I tend to be a sort of I'm anal retentive about going in consecutive order. So
we're going to get to our viewer questions in just a second. But the other thing that popped out as I was looking for the list of the things you've worked on, dance. And it caused me to wonder, when you're working with people on stage in movement or dance music for something else, is there a different kind of discipline in terms of they have to get from this beat or this figure to this, and I have to leave them enough time to make those physical changes? Is that part of your thinking?
Sometimes it's nice. I was the composer in residence for Chicago Tap Theater for many years, which is a tap dance company in Chicago, and they specialize in sort of long form narrative tap operas.
Nice.
So it's like a ballet, but there's no dialogue. They just sort of tap at each other, and we did some really cool stuff, including an adaptation of the French horror film Eyes Without a Face from 1960. We did a stage adaptation of that. But the nice thing about dance, more often than not, is that I talk to the choreographer, whoever's doing the movement, organizing first, and then I write them a piece. I can just write and then send it to them, and then he can be like, yeah, this all works. So it's like, as opposed to film where I'm responding to the picture, or underpinning the dialogue in the podcast, they're working to my stuff, so I have a lot more control in those cases.
You don't have to get out of the way.
Yeah, sure. One interesting thing about working with tap that the audio files or nerds out there will appreciate is, one thing I've made it a point of doing was never to write anything that was in the frequency range where the taps from their shoes were. So I went in with a microphone and recorded them tapping, and then did frequency analysis of where the taps were, and tried to keep music out of that. And then on my final pass, I'd EQ, do cutouts.
Put a little notch under the tap so they can hear.
Correct, where the taps are, so that the taps could be out in front. So even if I was doing drums, like low kick or something like that, or snare or whatever, I could do that. And then also one time I sampled 4 tap dancers jumping up in the air and all landing at the same time, and turned that into a contact instrument so that I could have tap percussion in the background. So
that sounds really cool. Fun. The last genre I just want you to touch in before we head into the audience questions is video games. Any particular hints, because so many people are interested in that area?
It's incredibly popular. When I started when I was a graduate student at Columbia in the late 2000s, there were 1 or 2 guys in my class who were like, I'm also really interested in video games. By the time I'd been teaching in the program for 5 or 6 years, half the class were just like, I'm not super interested in film. I really want to work on video games.
Yeah.
I mean, the swing was really, really wide. It's a really great community. Video game developers are great folks. GDC, it's the big conference out in San Francisco every year, is really wonderful, and it's a great environment. It's technically very demanding. A lot of the time, and you often have to crank out unbelievable amounts of music, 30, 40, 50 hours of music for a lot of video games.
Is it a lot of looping motifs that come in when characters come in, or are there longer stretches where you can really be free to write more complex scores? Yes. Okay.
Yes is the answer. There are lots of, it's very interactive now. And with the sort of generative technology that's coming in, it does even more, but you can have levels of intensity of the same piece of music. So it's written in stripes. And as the intensity level goes up, it fades in each additional level. You can have loops. You can have one shots that are just triggered by single events. Games like World of Warcraft, which is an online, massively multiplayer game, is basically like a jukebox, and they have 9 composers writing big orchestral pieces for each sort of land or region that you go to. And when you go to that region, it queues up the jukebox that was written for that, written by 9 different people. And so it just sort of flows from one piece to another while you're in that space. So there are lots of different ways that video game music is implemented these days. And knowing, if you're interested in getting into it, knowing how audio and music is implemented in video games, there are a lot of good books about that out there. Informs how you write for it, because you can't just write whatever you want. You have to write knowing that that's going to be sliced at this point, looped, or the ending has to be it. You really have to go into it knowing exactly how it's going to be implemented, or you create a nightmare for yourself and for your poor audio team.
Nice. All right, we've got questions stacking up, so let's dive into them.
Sure thing.
We start. Robert? Hi. We start with from Douglas Carmichael. What digital audio workstations do you prefer when working on a project? Do you use an external control surface?
What was the name of the questioner?
That's Douglas Carmichael.
Douglas. Hi, Douglas. I use Digital Performer. I used a Digital Performer when it was just Performer in the 90s. I switched to Logic Pro when I was in graduate school because they made us. Logic Pro is, in its defense, the most affordable professional quality digital audio workstation that you can buy. But I switched back to Digital Performer when Logic 10 came out because I hated Logic 10 immediately. I loved Logic 9 with all of my heart. But so I use that, and then I have a Behringer X Touch outboard MIDI mixer, because before I was a film composer for a number of years in New York City, I did live audio mixing off Broadway and at the Tribeca Performing Arts Center. So my training in mixing is grabbing faders, and I missed not being able to grab faders. So I have this little fader thing here. And then I also have my iPad running Metagrid Pro, which has a lot of keyboard shortcuts, key switches for orchestral instruments, and faders for expression and modulation control built into the iPad over here. So those are my external control surfaces.
Excellent. Next question.
From Robert Soji in Los Angeles, it's a little similar here, but what keyboard controllers does your guest use when working on an idea?
Oh, do you comp differently?
Hi, Robert. I have it's an Arturia. Hang on, I have to look down at it real quick because I can't remember the number on it. It's called the Keylab 88. So I have an Arturia Keylab 88 here. It's an 88 key controller. And it's pretty much all I use. I do have a Moog grandmother synthesizer over here that I use when I need that good old, because nothing beats analog when it comes to synthesizers. So I have that over there. And then I also I play the bass and the guitar as well. And I write on those sometimes because there's idiomatic ways of playing on those that's not the keyboard. And then behind me there is a hammered dulcimer that I love that I also use when I'm sketching. So those are my go-tos. But the Arturia Keylab with whatever sample is dialed up is usually how I go about starting my process.
Do you ever get any ideas in the field and comp anything on any of the devices that you use?
I've been known to sing into voice memo on my phone.
There you go.
Which is how Danny Elfman wrote the Batman theme in an airplane bathroom. So yeah,
personal echo chamber. I guess that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next question.
From Taloc Lopez Waterman in Santa Fe, New Mexico, do you conduct your scores?
When I can afford an orchestra, I do like conducting. I've done the Los Angeles Film Conducting Intensive, which was a really great experience, and I enjoy conducting. If I'm conducting, I need to have somebody whose ears I trust in the booth, because I'm not experienced enough as a conductor to be able to hear everything that's happening in the room, because I'm focusing on making sure I'm beating everything correctly and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So if I'm in the booth, I have someone I trust conducting. And if I'm conducting, I have someone I trust in the booth listening. I do love conducting. I've done it since high school. I was a student conductor. And then, yeah, it's great. It's exhilarating. It's like driving a Ferrari that's 75 separate Ferraris. So.
Oh, cool. Let's go to the next one.
From Rajan Shandil in Los Angeles, asking, many film and TV show composers are using uncommon musical instruments to create soundtracks. Can you talk about these techniques? Example, Ludwig Göransson and Daniel Pemberton.
Nice. Ludwig Göransson used a whole bunch of weird recorders for The Mandalorian, which is that main lick in The Mandalorian is a contrabass recorder. Pemberton for the first Into the Spider-Verse film, is that him or is that Nicholas Patel? No, that's Pemberton. Actually recorded the score with an orchestra, pressed it on vinyl so that he could like wiki DJ his own score like into
Scratched
the thing.
it, huh?
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's so cool. But yeah, no, we're all, I mean, composers are always looking to push through to something new and to find new sounds. And I think our ears just, respond to different things. A lot of stuff comes from around the world. Like I love trying to, this hammer dulcimer that I got has a stereo pickup. So I can, excuse me, I'm going to cough. So I can run it through my guitar pedal board over here and create all sorts of insane sounds. And I pick up little, I have a plastic little synthesizer from Japan over here. And I think we're just all inclined to hearing new sounds. And especially when we're trying to evoke imaginary worlds, I think creating new sounds, like, for example, like Hans Zimmer on Dune used no traditional instruments in that. The only thing that's at all recognizable as a sound is human voices. And even then he got some really crazy singers who sound just otherworldly. But a lot of that score is like Tina Guo playing the cello through a sample of one of those huge alpenhorns from Tibet, like, and triggering that, so it's just, that kind of thing has become a huge part of being a media composer now, is making your own samples and making sounds that nobody else has and that just you sort of discovered.
It must be tremendously freeing to know that you're working in an era where really the sky's the limit. I mean, if you have a thought, there's probably going to be a way to execute it within your reach.
Yeah, you can just make a contact instrument or any XS instrument. It's amazing. And I try to make sure there's at least one sort of custom proprietary sample made that I make for each new project I do. I try to.
How carefully do you document that? When you try to figure out something new, do you very precisely write down all the steps you took to create it, or are you looking for something that sounds this way in the moment and you're not as concerned about?
I tend to be pretty flow state-y. Like I just kind of stay in the moment and like go with it. I'm definitely not an overthinker when it comes to writing now, because I've just gotten so practiced at it that it just sort of, this is what I need to do, and I just sit down and do it. So
excellent. Let's go to the next question.
From Dave Troutman, Edmonton, Canada, and on our back-end crew, lately, filmmakers are thinking about the music during planning. Are you encouraged by this as bringing more forward than background cues for mood?
And that's a great example. And I just wanted to add, I'm going to ask you after you've answered this one, and I'll refresh your memory if you want. What about temp? How do you feel about temp stuff coming to you? But let's go with his question.
Could you repeat that question one more time?
Sure. Filmmakers are thinking about the music during planning. Are you encouraged by this as bringing music more forward rather than background cues?
That's been going on for a while. Sergio Leone used to have Morricone used to write the scores in advance of before Leone was shooting, and then he'd play the score over the scenes when they were shooting them, so that the actors could hear the score while they were performing. So that's the first instance I know of that happening. I know that sometimes Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross pre-write, and I know that Tom Tickver, Johnny Klimek, and Reinhold Heil, who do the music for like Perfume, The Story of a Murderer, Cloud Atlas. Trying to think what else they've done the music for. They're incredibly cool, but because Tom Tickver is also the director of the films that he scores with these other two guys, they write whole suites of music and then have it played over again while the actors are performing so that they can hear it. I know they did that with both Cloud Atlas and Perfume. I think it's interesting. I think it's partially it happening more commonly now. I think it's partially a result of production music libraries, because it's so easy to just grab, whatever vibe you want.
Yeah, that kind of leads to my thought about temp tracks. I've heard it over and over again.
I also, sorry, Bill, but I also, I was trained to respond to picture, and in order to pre-write, you have to sort of write in the abstract before you've seen anything. Like, you don't know what the actor looks like or what their voice sounds like or what the photography looks like. That all changes how I think the music should be. So when you're pre-writing, I feel like more often than not, it's just like, here's an idea, we'll see if it holds, you know. And I know some composers like to do it, obviously, or they wouldn't do it. But I prefer to respond to the image. And oftentimes, you know, films are made in the editing room. So if I read a script before it's shot, they could edit that down till it's unrecognizable. And so me reading the script wouldn't make any difference anyway. So I'm very much big into responding to the image. But that's just how I work, and other people work different ways, and that's cool. So
yeah, among the editors, I know that's that question about temp tracks. They get kind of lost in, this was on temp and we loved it, and now can you write something that's like this, because I'm in love with it.
Temp love is what we call it in the biz. But Danny Elfman will not work with you if you send him a film with a temp track. It's like, if you wanted that, why did you hire me? Like, and then you look at movies like Edward Scissorhands that had no temp track, and the score is just, you know, peerlessly magical. Sometimes temp is helpful to me. I recently worked with a director who, instead of using temp, just put a low, like, bass drone in the movie where he wanted music. And he didn't want a drone there. He was just giving me, like, it starts here and it ends here. So it helped me with you know,
spotting aid, basically.
Correct. Yeah. It was a little like the temp score was No Country for Old Men, but which has no score and just drones occasionally. But anyway, yeah, sometimes it's useful when you bump into temp love. I've just kind of stopped fighting it. Like, I recently worked on a short documentary that's really quite lovely, and the director had edited the end to a temp track, and he's like, "Can you do something sort of in that vibe?" And I didn't copy it exactly. I didn't want it to be a Tyler Bates 300 situation, but where he was asked to copy the temp to the point where the composer he was copying was like, I would like some of your money.
Yeah. Copyright strike or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you go on now, he's properly credited, but like the that was fixed. But like on this last one, I took 2 stabs at it, and I was like, and it wasn't working. I was like, just license the track. It's fine. Like, and he did. So,
and actually, Dave in his question brought up Baby Driver, which was so integrated. The editing and the music seemed to be literally hand in glove through the whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
How do you feel about that?
It's incredibly cool. And I mean, it almost goes into the sort of vernacular of the music of a music video. Mm-hmm. You know, when it clicks into that, but it's done with such sharpness and precision. Like, yeah, that movie's brilliant.
Nice. All right, let's go to the next question. We've still got a bunch here, and I'm going to try to get through them all.
Yeah, sure.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, have you ever composed a piece for a specific solo artist who has inspired you to want to compose a piece for their specific voice or instrument?
That's a really good question. Yeah, for when I lived back in Chicago, I worked with this young rhubarb player. The rhubarb is a lute from Afghanistan that sounds kind of like a cross between a banjo and a sitar. It's awesome. If you're not familiar with the rhubarb, I recommend you look it up. But anyway, I met this kid, and he just shredded. Like, he was so good. And he was used for like a demo in grad school. Like, we had a class on global folk traditions, which I really loved, and brought in players from around the world. So they brought in this kid. His name was Habib. And after hearing his demo, I then wrote 2 film scores to featured him after that. So two documentary scores that he played on after that, because I was just obsessed with the instrument, and he was so good. it was just such a different, talking about searching out new sounds. It was just such a different sound quality than we were used to hearing, because people would hear it and be like, what is that? Yeah, and I love that. So for sure, Habib, who I don't know what he's doing now. I think he went to law school, but I wish I could use him on. I wish I could use him on absolutely every project, because that was just the coolest instrument.
I'm going to totally go up on this because I can't remember the name of the guest artist, but Corey Henry did a gig in Los Angeles and had somebody on an instrument I had never seen before, and the guy just shredded. And Corey and his band are
they're amazing. Yeah,
and he just fit right in on this thing. I've never seen that. It was some kind of dulcimer thing kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was just astonishing. I love that. All right, let's go to the next question. We got lots of stuff.
From Robert Soji here in Los Angeles, has your guest produced a final music score completely in the box and not used real musical instruments?
Ooh.
Often, yes. I try to do to augment everything I do with at least something real. So, but yeah, I've absolutely produced in the box scores before. That's usually when I start making weird contact instruments. If I know the budget doesn't go to me paying, because I will always pay live players before I pay myself.
Hey, flip it around and the box is your instrument. So there
correct. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It just depends on how you use it, right? So, but yeah, I've absolutely done pure in the box scores. It's pretty common actually. So
next question.
From Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri, do you notate the taps in the orchestra score for a taps show?
No.
Way below a 16th note.
Yeah, no. Those guys have intricate feet, and that would be a nightmare transcription job. So no, absolutely not. Again, most of the time I was writing it before I heard the dance. So usually the taps were responding to me, so they didn't really have anything to do with me. Once in a while, if I attended a rehearsal and I saw that something was getting in the way of taps, I would just go in and delete it. But that was about as close to notating taps as I got. That
makes me wonder if there's a notation for tap dancers. Is there any way they can write down a pattern?
There are shorthands. There are shorthand kind of things, and you can use the names of different, because all the little moves have little names, and so they can do a. Yeah.
Fascinating. Let's go to the next question.
From Rajan Chandil in Los Angeles, can you describe your feeling when you heard the soundtrack to Poor Things? What about Greatest Showman?
Ooh, okay. There you go.
I loved the Poor Things soundtrack because it was so, talk about challenging, our expectations. I thought that score was amazing, and I'm furious that the composer is 29 years old. But it's just really remarkable music. Pasek and Paul write great pop songs. I have not been super into musical theater in quite a while, so that didn't really sit or land for me. But the songs, there's some really good songs in that show for sure. For sure.
Let's go to the next question.
From Dave Troutman, Edmonton, Canada. I was exposed to Peter and the Wolf Opera 67 from Sergei Prokofiev at a young age. I believe it drew me into the power of the music to illustrate a story. How do you maintain that kind of focus on a story?
Ooh, interesting question.
Peter and the Wolf is great. I have a funny story. When I was a kid, my mom got me a little vinyl record of Peter and the Wolf with a little book that went with it, and you could follow along. And whenever there's a point where the narration says, and the wolf looked at somebody with greedy eyes, and then the orchestra swelled up at that point, and it scared me so much. I made my mom take the record away from me.
Nice.
So anyway, I love Peter and the Wolf because it scared me as a child. But anyway,
the power of music.
But no, when you're focused on a story, especially when you're hired to focus on a story, you just have to keep going back to the story. The second you get caught up in other stuff, you lose the thread. So what's the what's the meat, the heart, the core of whatever story or whatever scene you happen to be working on. Like who's the focus, what should the audience be taking away from this? How can I convey that without hitting them over the head? With one obvious emotion, like how do you thread these sort of intricate psychological and emotional spaces, because that's what a score has to do at the end of the day, is evoke the psychological and emotional subtext of whatever the story is.
Nigel wants to get on this as well. Nigel, you had a question?
Go for it.
I was only going to say I had the same record, but I had Sparky and his magic piano on the other side, but I don't know whether that was a UK thing or not.
My mother was an avowed Anglophile, and so I had that on the shelf, definitely.
Well, Peter and the Wolf. Prokofiev. I remember thinking, wow, it's that character sounds like that. It's just that's lovely.
It's delightful. I have a CD of it with David Bowie doing the narration. That is
nice.
That is gorgeous.
Right. Let's go to the next question.
We have Talag Lopez Waterman, Santa Fe, New Mexico, writing in preference for narrative, documentary, musical theater, or something else.
I've written a couple of musicals. Actually, a musical I wrote is going up next month at my old high school, which is sort of strange and cool. But I love doing documentaries, and I've done quite a few. And I feel like a lot of times documentaries present unique challenges to a composer, because you end up having to do a lot of what I call balloon tapping, sort of tapping the balloon up, and then it sort of drifts back down, and you tap it up again and it drifts back down, because there's talking heads a lot and a lot of information coming at. And so the music can't pull away from that. So you really have to focus on keeping the audience engaged with what's going on, and sort of underpinning it, and then heightening, the drama, wherever possible. They're tricky. And I see a lot of missed opportunities in documentaries often. So I always try to bring as much sort of impact and emotional resonance, but also like help create the sections of a documentary, because documentaries don't always follow just like a story. They, we're going to focus on this and we're going to focus on this. And if you just watch it through without music, it's hard to tell where one thing ends and the next thing begins. And so there is a lot of structural elements to scoring documentaries. So I really love scoring documentaries. Writing musicals is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And a lot of having to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite.
Drew, have you had the experience where you put in a figure musically and think this will really help at this point, but then for maybe in a documentary there was something else the filmmaker thought was more important, and so they ducked you down under and you lost the thing that you loved?
I tried to, kill your darlings, right? But at the end of the day, what works in the film is more important than my feelings. So I try to just go with it. But like that's the kind of thing where like I try to take that into consideration when I'm writing. Like I try not to compete. I treat the dialogue like another line of musical counterpoint. So you don't want to get in the way of the most important, musical line that's happening. With whatever I'm really excited about. So which doesn't matter really.
At some point it's a collaborative art form. So
sure. Yeah. And I'll fight for my thing once in a while, but I try to pick my battles.
Yeah. Now let's go to the next question.
From Robert Soji in Los Angeles, when your guest starts work on a new project, does he start with rhythm or melody?
Harmony.
Really? You start with harmony? You start building layers?
Yeah, I start with chords that evoke the kind of space. Before melody or anything else happens, I start with harmony. It's really important to me.
So is it fair to say that mood is the single most important factor in terms of you laying down a score?
For sure. Yeah. Because if you don't have that nailed, like you can't do anything else. Like it's the floor of the whole rest of the score. Like if the vibe doesn't work for the director, it doesn't matter what the melody is. You've got to capture the mood and the tone, and I use the term texture a lot. Because after harmony for me comes texture. before I ever get to like melody or motive or rhythm. So,
and how does tempo work into that? Do you find you do things at a particular tempo and find you have to adjust it later based on the flow of things?
I usually just watch a scene over and over and over again, and I have a tempo tap app on my phone. And after I've watched it through like a couple of times, I'll kind of figure out like what feels right for the scene and tap it in, and it'll tell me it's 74 BPM or whatever, and then I'll drop that in the DAW. I might change my mind later, but having a tempo and like a structure for a cue before I start writing frees up a lot of the creative space. I try to give myself as much of a scaffolding in terms of time, tempo, meter, what instruments I'm probably going to be using before I start writing, because that just frees up a lot of bandwidth in my brain.
Let's go to the next question.
From Jeremy Horn in the San Francisco Bay Area, what is your current monitoring setup? Headphones, monitor speakers, modeling plugins?
Yeah.
I use on my orchestra, my sampler orchestra, I have a plugin called Mir that's made by Vienna Instruments, and it models physical recording studios. And you can actually position virtual instruments facing different directions, like inside of the virtual space. So my orchestra goes through that. In my studio, I have, for recording myself, I have this Neumann, what's T something 103 in front of me. And then I have
TLM 103.
That's the one. Thanks, Bill. And then I have Neumann speakers or monitors on either side here. I like the German sound. And then these are biodynamic headphones. So I usually write, these are open backed so I can hear the room, because I usually write on headphones and mix on speakers. But because these are open back, it's usually not a huge difference. It's just on principle, I don't like to mix on headphones. So
does it collapse the sound field for you just too much, and you want to feel it in the space?
Yeah, it's a little bit of fresh ears on it, because it sounds just different enough that I notice different things when it's sort of more broad in the room than specifically in my ear. But I like to hear detail is more important when I'm writing, and the overall effect of listening to it in the room is more important when I'm mixing. So
makes perfect sense. Let's go to the next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, if you're using a DAW that doesn't support native video playback, would using an app like VideoSync cause any issues in a typical media composition workflow? And a link is provided to nonlethalapplications.com.
I don't know the answer to that. I just run my video out of Digital Performer, and it works fine. So I try to keep my setup as transparent as possible. I don't like to fuss with gear. So everything I have set up in here just works. Otherwise, I tend to get rid of it pretty quickly. So I wish you well with your what sounds like a headache.
When you get a first cut that they want you to work with and they make some substantial changes, do you find with your setup the way it is now that that's easy to address, or does it sometimes drive you nuts?
It's just the nature of the beast. I prefer to have more time to work. So
you'd rather get early versions, even if they're not final, so that you can get ideas flowing.
Correct. I want as much time as I can possibly have with it. And the way I'm set up, like I can just save. Digital Performer has a really great function called chunks, which is a stupid name, but it's great. So where you can save multiple start points in the same video in the same project. So if I have to make changes to it, if I chunk one as the rough cut, and then they send me the fine cut, I can just save it as chunk 2 and then make changes to it without messing up the first one, because I've learned this lesson the hard way. Sometimes they go back and they're like, oh, we liked that the way it was before. So I try to save every, version dot whatever that I'm working on in a fresh chunk. But it's easier to erase than it is to add later on, because you're not in the headspace. You're not in the headspace you were when you wrote it anymore. So I would rather have to write 3 minutes and cut it down to 45 seconds than the other way around.
Very nice. Let's move to the next question.
From Kenny Hampton, Greenville, Illinois, do you utilize orchestral samples in your composing? Preferred software packages?
Yes, I have a virtual orchestra that I'm very happy with. I use a lot of Spitfire instruments, Spitfire Audio out of England. I like their studio strings and their Albion libraries. I use their symphonic brass and their symphonic woodwinds Pro as well. And then I have a percussion from a lot of various things, including Spitfire. I can't remember who makes Damage, but I use that. And then, and then a bunch of percussion that I've made myself. But yeah, sorry about the dog in the background. But so Spitfire has become my go-to orchestra. I've got it all routed through an iPad template, so I can cue all the key switches, move from staccato to legato to tremolo or whatever. That was painstaking, but it's worth it because I can just do and dial it up. Spitfire.
Do you ever go out and do any field recording of a particular sound? I'm flashing on the Billie Eilish and Phineas thing about I'd like the street crossing noise, so we put it in the song.
Yeah, I've done that. There was a really cool street crossing noise in Dublin that I put in a song once that I recorded when I was in Dublin. Yeah, I do field recordings. For one, what was that movie? I can't remember. We did a whole drum kit banging on a dumpster. Out back. And at one point, a van drove by. It was in Chicago, so it was out in an alley. And a van drove by, and I left it in as a riser. I love field recording. It's
all soundscape. Let's go to the next question.
From David Brady in New York City, what is your take on AI music to creation? And can these techniques be applied to synths such as SuperCollider?
I am so I feel like the whole AI thing, they're so high on their own marketing supply. And they're not where's the demand for the stuff that they're pushing? It's like everything they come out with, everyone's like, wow, why are you doing that? So here is what I want AI to do. I want to be able to write music, and in the background, the AI program is notating the score and the parts for me while I'm writing and making changes as I'm making changes. This is what composers want. Also, composers want AI that will handle all of our business admin stuff so that we don't have to do it. That's the kind of thing I would like AI to do. In terms of tools that we're going to be able to use as composers, because in the future, there are going to be two kinds of composers who use AI and composers who don't work. So there's going to be some tool in your toolkit that's going to have AI in it. I'm interested to see where things go in terms of generating original music. I think that's the least interesting thing that people can be putting their investments into in terms of musical.
All right, we've got two more questions here, and I want to get through everybody because this has been so much fun. Let's go to the next one.
Dave Troutman from Edmonton, Canada writes in, are you ever pleased to hear people say they didn't notice the music in a film?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. More often than not, I've had some films written up, reviewed that I've worked on. And more often than not, if they don't mention the music, it means they liked it. No news is good news. And also, if the music is doing its job, it shouldn't be pulling you out of the film. It should be helping immerse you in the film. So if you had a positive experience and you didn't notice the music, my work here is done.
Last question.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, writing in, is a film score often the best classical music being composed and produced today?
Ooh, depends on what you mean by classical. That's
Is this going to be a
that's
duel?
no. I mean, I'm gonna take on face value what you mean and not read anything into classical as like an academic term. I would say yes, there is some incredibly brilliant, like The Matrix is an astonishing piece of contemporary orchestral music. Like it's crazy, and nobody's done anything like it since. Like it's How to Train Your Dragon is an extraordinary piece of classical music. So I think, I think the argument could definitely be made that's the case. Interstellar, come on, yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure.
This has been such an exciting hour. Andrew M. Edwards. Drew, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a pleasure to have you chat about this stuff. Anything you want to do in terms of how people can contact you or anything else before we finish up?
You can listen to me on Apple Music, Spotify, Bandcamp, anywhere you get music. If you want to reach out to me, Facebook Messenger is usually the best way to do it. I'm not on social media very much, pointedly. So yeah, and andrewmedwards.com. So
perfect. Our Talak traversal today, we've covered 60,000 miles. That's 97,000 kilometers, 479 million bananas for scale. We'll be back next show. Thank you all for being here. Drew, great day. Thank you. That was a fun hour. I enjoyed the heck out of that. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, that was fun, Bill. Thanks so much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think our audience took a lot out of this. I learned a bunch of things about the way you actually worked and the way the music industry works now. So that's what we're trying to do here every day, is give people an insight into the real world of production. So well done.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks, Nigel. Robert, nice job.
Thank you, and many goosebumps from all the amazing films. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Do I sign off now? Is that it? Or
you can just log out of Zoom.
Okay.
There should be a button somewhere that says leave room, and then just leave. It'll get you to leave everything. And
cool. I just didn't want to rudely leave before anybody wanted to follow up or anything. So.
Somebody in our ear will say we're over, but I think we're over now that the thing has been there.